My final thoughts, injury update, and predictions for Monday night are all coming your way today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, folks, it's time for our last conversation before the Bills host the Jacksonville Jaguars for Monday Night Football. Orchard Park, Highmark Stadium, kickoff, 7:30 p.m. Don't forget that. You show up at 8:15, you're going to miss the first quarter. 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time kickoff tonight with the NFL having two Monday night games in Week 3. Want to start off by talking about vibes and dynamics. And you know me, I don't do a lot of that. But I think this is important for this game. Then we'll talk to Dr. Trimble of Banged Up Bills about the injuries. Of course, want to discuss Terrel Bernard and get any thoughts that he has on Josh Allen and what that left hand is looking like. And then, of course, we'll close things out with my 5 predictions for Monday. Real quick, James Cook, congratulations to him, named AFC Offensive Player of the Week for his performance in Week 2. 12 touches, 95 yards, 3 touchdowns against the Miami Dolphins. And so in Week 1, Greg Rousseau, Defensive Player of the Week. Week 2, James Cook, Offensive Player of the Week. We'll see what happens for Week 3. All right, let's talk vibes and dynamics. The reason I want to get into this is because I think there's very interesting storylines as it relates to the Bills and their recent history against Jacksonville, and then what's going on with Jacksonville entering this game. You know, the last 2 games against Jacksonville for the Bills were very weird games. The Week 5 loss last year, 25-20 in London, and then in 2021, a 9-6 loss to the Urban Meyer Jaguars. They were terrible that year, and the Bills lost to them. And so you kind of can't talk about Bills-Jags without thinking about that, right? I know when the schedule came out and people saw Bills against Jaguars, a lot of people were not wanting to deal with that, right? And now it's a showcase game, Monday Night Football. The world's going to be watching. Let's talk a little bit about those previous 2 matchups. Let's go back to the 2021 loss, 9-6 to the Urban Meyer Jaguars. The Bills had 12 penalties for 118 yards in that game. 5 personal fouls against the Bills. Do you remember this? The Bills showed up and it just felt like nothing can go their way. Taron Johnson had a running into the kicker penalty. 3 turnovers in that game, and they were all terrible. 3 terrible Josh Allen turnovers. 2 interceptions and 1 fumble. The offensive line was terrible. Ike Bucker, your starting left guard. Cody Ford, your starting right guard. Darrell Williams at right tackle got cooked. I went back and watched it. Wasn't a good game. Penalties, turnovers, bad O-line play. Then you have last year a 25-20 loss, Week 5 in London. Remember the Jaguars played back-to-back weeks in London. The Bills were the second game that they played there. So they were there an entire week before, fully accustomed to the time change. The Bills show up on what, like Friday afternoon? Sean McDermott and the big plan of banking sleep. They mismanaged the trip, right? They botched the trip. And then you have to be reminded of who the Bills were without that game. On defense, no Greg Rousseau, no Christian Benford. Shaq Lawson was out. Trey White had the Achilles injury the week before. And then in the first half, you lose Daquan Jones and Matt Milano. Your defense was depleted. Oh, by the way, penalties are a problem. 11 penalties for 109 yards. The Bills had 0 rushing output. Josh Allen led the team in rushing yards, 14 rushing yards. James Cook, 5 for -4. Damian Harris, 3 for 13. Latavius Murray, 2 for 6. The Bills running backs had 10 carries for 15 yards. Still played a tight game. It was basically an 11-7 game for the first 3 quarters, and then the Jaguars outscored the Bills 14-13 in the fourth quarter. The final score 25-20. Just a really weird game. And what I'd say about looking at both of these two games, Week 5 last year, the 2021 9-6 loss, is that the Bills are a very, very different team right now. I get it. The games have been weird. You're nervous about it. I understand that. But the word that I keep coming back to for the Bills this year, based on just watching them through 2 games, and there's a lot that has to play out. We are early in the season. So much can change. But the word I keep coming back to describe the Buffalo Bills that I'm watching right now, just a very mature football team. That's the word I keep coming back to. And I'd say this really goes back to every Bills game since the Philly loss last year in Week 12. They went into the bye and they came out just a very different football team, in my opinion. The Kansas City game, Dallas, road game against the Chargers, Patriots in Miami to close it out, 2 playoff games, Pittsburgh and Kansas City, 2 games to start this year. I think the Bills are playing very mature football. And I like that a lot. I think there's just a really different vibe around this Bills football team. And I think the Bills anticipated a lot of these league trends and have built their operation to be able to handle them. So when we think about the Bills and those games, there's no transitive property in football, folks. Those games really don't matter in the grand scheme of what how this game's gonna play out. There's no transitive property. Like, you always have to remember that. This game will take on its own life. And the Bills are a much more mature operation right now than they were in Week 5 last year or the 2021 midseason 9-6 loss to the Jaguars. Let's talk about the Jaguars. 0-2 football team, but a very talented 0-2 football team. It's a big moment for them, right? We always so focused on looking at these games through the lens of the Bills, and hey, you get a chance to get to 3-0 before you go on this 3-game road trip against the Ravens, Texans, and Jets. It feels important, right? Get this one at home, Monday Night Football. This is a big moment for Jacksonville. 0-2. They've been reeling. They've lost 7 of their last 8 games dating back to last year. Their lone win coming in Week 17 against the Carolina Panthers. They've been a really streaky football team under Doug Pederson, who, you remember, won the Super Bowl with the Eagles in 2017. Caught lightning in a bottle with Nick Foles. And it didn't take very long for him to be shown the door. Very quiet, everybody kind of thought, well, what's going on here? This is weird. And you think, oh man, Doug Pederson, he'll get another job. You know he's going to be great. He goes to Jacksonville. They have all these resources. They have Trevor Lawrence, and they've been really streaky. Their first season in 2022, they started 4-8. They won their last 5. They go 9-8. They wind up winning the division in 2022. Have the big, crazy come-from-behind win in the wild card round against the Chargers, and then they played Kansas City tough in the divisional round. And then they carried that really good finish in 2022 into a hot start in 2023. They were 8-3 to start last season. The Jags have arrived, right? They're part of the elite teams in the AFC. They're here. Nope. They finished 9-8 and missed the playoffs. The Texans, who started the year 0-2, won the AFC South last year. This is a huge moment for them. And in some ways, I know it's weird to say this in Week 3, but they're a desperate football team. Since 1990, teams that start the year 0-3 have a 2.5% chance of making the playoffs. Jacksonville can't find themselves in that spot. They got to win. Of course, the Bills don't want that to happen. I think it's important to point all that stuff out. I think it will affect the way the Bills play this game. I think it will affect the way the Jaguars play this game. And you have to be mindful of that on both sides of it as you anticipate how this game script's going to play out. One last note. Bills have a rest advantage in this game. Of course, they played Thursday night against Miami. It feels like 100 years ago, right? And then the Jaguars played a regular Sunday game. So the Bills with a rest advantage. since 2020, which is kind of that moment where the Bills became this version of themselves. Since 2020, the Bills with a rest advantage, 12-5. That's the 5th best win percentage in the NFL since 2020 with a rest advantage. Jaguars under Doug Pederson, 2-5 with a rest disadvantage, and that goes back to the start of 2022. That's 6th worst in the NFL in terms of win percentage. So those are the dynamics, folks. On the other side of it, we're talking to Dr. Kyle Trimble of Banged Up Bills about the injuries, and then, of course, segment 3, my 5 predictions for Monday night. Be sure to stick with me. Game days for me are really busy, folks. I got 2 young kids, and it can be hard for us to find time to cook or get to the grocery store. Well, thankfully, DoorDash can handle all of that for us. DoorDash is a food delivery app that brings me food right to my front door. If I want to order from my favorite restaurants, if I need something from the grocery store. Last week, I needed batteries. I needed a 9-volt battery to replace a battery and a smoke detector in my house. I didn't have one in the drawer. Well, DoorDash got one from CVS, brought it right to my front door. The convenience of DoorDash is simply unmatched. So use it for yourself. Check it out. Use our promo code LOCKEDFALL24 for 50% off, up to a $10 value when you spend $15 on your first order. Limited time offer. Terms apply. Promo is not valid for orders containing alcohol. DoorDash, your door to game day greatness, your door to more. Download the DoorDash app now to order your game day favorites. Must be 21 or older to order alcohol. Drink responsibly. Alcohol available only in select markets. I'm joined now by Kyle Trimble. He's a doctor of physical therapy. He runs bangedupbills.com. You can follow him on X at bangedupbills. He joins us each week to get us ready for the upcoming Bills game from an injury perspective, and we got some things to dive into. Only 2 players, though, with a game day designation, both ruled out. Taron Johnson out. We knew that. Terrel Bernard injured against Miami. He's been ruled out for this game. Let's start there. We already know the Taron Johnson situation, but good news is it doesn't appear he's headed to injured reserve, and probably the case with Terrel Bernard not headed to injured reserve. So, Kyle, will you catch us up on your thoughts with this Bernard situation and the fact that neither appears to be headed for injured reserve?
So excellent news that both are not going to injured reserve. Like you said, we'll go over Bernard stuff first, and then briefly talk about the injured reserve process. So going back, because this is the first time we've talked since week 2 Miami, Terrel Bernard injured his left pectoral while trying to get away from Robert Jones late in the first quarter. Jones kept on trying to block Bernard, and Bernard was trying to get away from him, and it injured the pectoral muscle. This wasn't apparent on film initially until I went back and looked, because the next 3 plays he tried to tackle with his right arm, and he was really struggling, especially down at that goal line play prior to the final play where he went out. Like, he was trying to flag to get out, and he couldn't get out, so he had to play one more play on the goal line. He kind of fell through and just realized this wasn't happening. There was a stoppage of play, and he's about to get out. So he did have a pectoral strain. We didn't know the severity until they came out the next day and said it was pectoral strain. He's expected to miss about a month, which is a very, very promising sign, considering we've seen Daquan Jones, John Feliciano. They've been out with pectoral tears, and then even Matt Milano several years ago, he really struggled with his pectoral strain when he suffered that against the Raiders. I believe it was in week 4 that year. So it's very promising. And then going back to the injury reserve aspect of that, it's great to see that both are not going on injury reserve, because that tells us that Taron Johnson, for first, it's likely not a fracture. I have seen some forearm injuries that are fractures come back in a few weeks there, but I would think they'd want to take their time early on in the season. So that tells me it's definitely more soft tissue. I'm definitely think it's maybe more of a nerve thing too, where you can get like a nerve contusion, and it can take a little bit longer than your traditional bruising, just because the nerve is a little more sensitive. There's different structures involved. So we haven't got any specific clarification on his injury, but the fact that he's going to come back and likely come back with some type of forearm brace is really promising. Maybe he comes back in week 4, maybe week 5. It just, once we see him practicing, we'll have a better idea. And then as for Bernard, when he does return, he'll return with a shoulder harness. We've seen many players play. In fact, Quentin Morris is playing with one right now due to his right shoulder injury suffered in the preseason. But the fact that Bernard is not going on injury reserve indicates this is on the more milder side of strains when you're looking at the severity. It's probably a grade 2, maybe even a more significant grade 1. But based off of that, I'm expecting him to come back maybe 3 games, because if he's expecting 4, maybe 5 games, bake in some setbacks and some ramp up time. That way, I would interpret that if you're going to keep him out that long and need more ramp up time, just put him in IR. You don't want to waste the roster spot, but you also don't want to waste an injured reserve spot, because you might need those later. We see some teams are having burned through those. I believe the Rams are one of them right now. So, even if he does take 4 games and say, hey, let's keep him out just to be sure, it at least tells us more mild and it shouldn't linger like we saw with some other injuries.
All right. So important players hurt, but it seems like the diagnosis is somewhat favorable, and these guys should be back sooner rather than later, and avoiding injured reserve is definitely a big deal in that conversation. We got to talk about Josh Allen, this left hand. Obviously, he's playing. He practiced all week. We have no concerns there, but we did get a chance to see him play with the glove. There's been imaging. He's done interviews. Everyone's zooming in on the hands, right? Every imaginable piece of information you can glean from studying these things. I know that you're doing that. So curious kind of your updated thoughts after more information has been able to be gathered on Josh Allen's left hand.
The initial thought was a contusion. I mean, we definitely see there's bruising. There is some type of contusion in there, but now with them seeing that the middle finger and ring finger are taped up, that at least tells me there's some type of sprain in there. Not so much at the finger, but more at the metacarpals, the lumbricals, all the lumbricals are the muscles in there, but there's some type of sprain somewhere in the area that requires some extra stability. I don't buy that there's a break in there, because the way we've seen him, handle the football, way he's had to, handle his bags. That was a big thing when we saw the reporters out there. Like, I just don't think you're moving your hand around that well if your hand is broken. I mean, I think the pain would stop you, everything else with that there. So we know it's not going to be 100% better, because sprains do take time, even with Josh Allen, but this at least tells me that he's going to still probably wear the glove a little bit longer for extra padding to prevent, direct hits to the area, but the tape probably allows the ring finger, which is where we saw most of the bruising at, especially at the base on the palm side, to continue to heal up and not get aggravated. So he did have that one fumble in the Miami Dolphins game, but he wasn't relied on as much to be Superman as he has been in other games there. So it's going to take some time to heal up, but he looks like he's trending in the right direction.
And good news there as well. Now, listen, I didn't load up this recording today planning to talk about Matt Milano, but you want to talk about Matt Milano, and so I'll give you the floor to kind of give us an update on some information you'll be able to figure out on that situation.
All right. So I did get an email. I do get some emails occasionally from Locked On Bills listeners. This one being named Jeff. He'd asked me to talk about this on Locked On Bills, but he had noticed on the Bills app that they did team photo sessions today. And I saw that be the case because I saw some other stuff on Instagram that they were in the field house and everything else like that. So we know the team photos were taken today. Jeff, the writer, had noticed that Matt Milano did not have a sling, a brace, a cast, or anything else on the left arm, which is very promising to see that he's back out there, because this is the first instance we've seen Matt Milano out in public since the surgery. So he had surgery sometime around August 22nd, 23rd, in that range. We don't know the exact date, but that week we know he had surgery because Brandon Beane told us that, I believe, on One Bills Live. So it's been about a month since that. Should he be out of a brace yet? That might be more Turner's surgeon discretion. There's, based off of the surgeon, what they want to do and how long the time frame is with that. I would expect them to be in some type of brace when they're doing rehab and other things like that. But I think for a team photo, they can say, hey, you're not gonna be stressing this thing. You're not gonna be doing anything, bad to the area. Let's make it look good, so people aren't gonna remember that, hey, you hurt your elbow and you're gonna be out of the team photo for a little bit. So that at least tells us he's moving in the right direction, that he's not having any setbacks. It's not something I would have caught unless Jeff, had noticed that. So I do thank him for that. So we still have a long ways to go before we see him back on the field, but it's positive to see him back out there, see him not having any braced up with a hinged brace and whatnot. And then going off of that too, I did see Terrel Bernard, who we just talked about. I didn't see any diffuse bruising on the left arm at all either. So like his tattoos maybe mask some of that stuff, but if there was a really bad strain, you would see bruising kind of really spread out all along the chest area, which wasn't shown in the picture, but we would see spread out to the upper arm and whatnot. So the fact that I don't see a discoloration is a good sign with that there. So there's definitely nuggets in what the Bills give us. It's just, you got to know where to look.
Yeah, and I know you know how to figure that stuff out. So thanks to Jeff for sending that in and giving Dr. Kyle Trimble a chance to put the magnifying glass on and figure out what the heck's going on with these players. Couple comments real quick on the Jaguars to get everyone up to speed on that side of things. Evan Engram, their outstanding tight end, he's going to be out for this game with a hamstring injury. Had 143 targets to lead the team last year. 114 receptions also led the team last year. He's not available on Monday night. Also, Darnell Savage, their starting nickel defender, kind of their third safety player, plays a lot of snaps. He won't be available for this game. So that's another notable player that they'll be without. And the last guy to kind of keep an eye on is Tank Bigsby, their running back to go with Travis Etienne. I feel like they want him to be a part of this offense. And he's questionable with the shoulder injury. I think there's some momentum for him to play. I think there's been a lot of messaging that he's going to play. But something to be mindful of from their perspective is, a physical downhill runner like Bigsby with a shoulder, how much does that restrict him? He missed last week. So just something to be mindful of from the Jaguars side of things. All right, Dr. Kyle Trimble, thanks for being here as always and sharing your expertise. Short week for the Bills this week. Fingers crossed, no new injuries. But if there are, of course, we'll be talking about them with you next week. As always, thanks for coming on.
Thanks you, Joe, and go Bills.
Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Check it out, folks. That's FanDuel.com. All right, folks, it's prediction time here to close out all of our pregame Jacksonville Jaguars conversations. Before we get there, I would love to extend an invitation to you to join the Locked On Bills subtext community. I'm so proud of the community that we're building around this podcast, and one way that you can become engaged with that is by joining the Locked On Bills subtext community. There's a link in today's show notes to join. Here's what you get. Well, first of all, you get my first reaction to all Bills news right to your phone. I send you a text message that will tell you what the news is and my first reaction. So no need for you to be spending time scrolling social media for Bills news. I'm going to send that right to your phone, and I'm going to give you my first reaction to it. You get my in-game text. So when the Bills are playing the Jaguars, pretty much after every drive, I'm going to be sending out thoughts, observations, what I'm seeing, what I'm hoping to see. I have a lot of fun with that. You kind of get in the moment with me. I have a lot of all caps, right? A lot of exclamation points. We have fun. So be part of that. You also get my all 22 review file. So after the game, I spend the next day in the tape, breaking down every play, and I send, 30, 40 clips to the subtext community so they can see the plays, and then I do voiceover commentary where I break down what I'm seeing. So you get that, and you get access to our Discord community. That we're having so much fun. We've got like 1,100 Bills fans in there. We have exclusive content. I did a live episode of Herd Mentality only for the Discord community last week. We've got another one of those coming up this Wednesday. Different events all the time, different ways that we're engaging, having a lot of fun. I don't post that much on social media because I'm putting a lot of my thoughts in the Discord channel and engaging with everyone in there. So check it out. Link in today's show notes to be part of the subtext community, which gets you into our Discord, and we're having a lot of fun. Do not miss out. All right, folks, prediction time. Got 5 of them for you here today. Let's get into it. My first prediction. Trevor Lawrence, Jacksonville Jaguars quarterback, throws his first interception of the season. He has not thrown an interception through 2 games, through 14 last year. I think he's due. I think there's a little bit of desperation to this football team. It's time to really dial it up. And if there's some tight windows, a little bit of pressure, I think you could see the Bills take away the football in the form of an interception. I went through a lot of the metrics with Trevor Lawrence in the primer on Friday. Not necessarily getting the ball out quick, throwing the ball down the field a ton, getting quick pressure, getting sacked a ton. That's a recipe for an interception. I think the Bills get at least one on Monday night. Number 2, I want to do something a little with Curtis Samuel. And as I always try to tell you, whenever I do my predictions, I want to be right about the predictions, but I really want to tell you a story in terms of how I think the game script's going to go and try to quantify some of that. And so, one of the big narratives with the Bills against Jacksonville is Jacksonville and the frequency of playing man coverage, the highest percentage of man coverage in the NFL by a large margin. And so I think this is a game, if they're going to play that type of coverage against the Bills, where you're going to see the ball go to certain types of players that are good at beating man coverage. Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, the running backs, I think, of course, James Cook. But I think Curtis Samuel's going to have a bit of a role. He's been quiet to start this year. I think this is a game where he wakes up a little bit. So far this year, he has 3 catches for 18 yards. I think he at least matches the 3 catches he has for the season going into this game, and I think he has more than 18 yards. So he will take the production he's had through 2 games, and he will do more than that in this game. My next prediction, I think Josh Allen throws for at least 250 yards. And maybe you're thinking, Joe, 250? That's not that many. Well, how many times do you think Josh Allen's thrown for 250 yards or more over his last 9 starts, including the playoffs? How many times? 1 time. That's it. Once. Week 18 in Miami. That's it. 8 of his last 9 games have been under 250 yards passing. I think this is a game where there's probably going to be some muddy runs. Let's be honest. I think the Jacksonville front is good, and I think they're very physical. I think they're fast. They've got good size. I think there's going to be some muddy runs in this game, and I think the Bills are going to have to throw it a little bit. So put me down for 250 yards passing or more from Josh Allen. Number 3, I've been nailing who I think is going to get a sack so far this year. Week 1, I thought Greg Rousseau would get a sack, and he got 3 of them. Week 2, I said Ed Oliver, he got a sack and really kind of had that drive where he, in a lot of ways, I think the game flipped on a couple of tackles for loss, including a sack from Ed Oliver. I think Greg Rousseau gets back on the board this week. Put me down for a Greg Rousseau sack. He missed the game last year against Jacksonville, but Trevor Lawrence is getting sacked this year. 12% of Trevor Lawrence dropbacks are resulting in sacks. It's a crazy high percentage. Part of that, he's throwing to his first read, and he's throwing the ball down the field a lot, and I think they're struggling to protect that right tackle, Anton Harrison. I think the Bills will be able to get through him a little bit. And so I think Von Miller could get a sack. I think A.J. Epinesa could get a sack, but I really think Greg Rousseau can dominate that matchup against Anton Harrison. And then my last one, do I think the Bills win this game or not? I do think the Bills win. I do. I recognize all the stuff that I've said and how important this game is for Jacksonville. I just think the Bills are playing the type of football that lends itself well to winning a game like this, where they're not beating themselves, and they're just very adaptable. They're not game script dependent like a lot of teams are. At home with a rest advantage, Monday Night Football, put me down for a Bills dub. And that means we'll have our first Victory Tuesday of the season afterwards. All right, folks, that's it. The hay is in the barn. We've done all we can on this podcast to get ready for Bills Jaguars. Only thing that's left to do is for the Bills to go out there and win the game. Plenty of post-game coverage, of course, coming your way, and then we'll start getting ready for Week 4. So don't miss anything. We'll get you post-game reaction, all 22 review, and then, of course, we'll start talking about, is it the Ravens? Let me check I got to check my schedule here. Is it Ravens in Week 4. We'll get ready for that when we're done breaking down this Jaguars game. All right, folks, thanks so much for being here. Enjoy the game. And remember, 7:30 kickoff on Monday night. As always, I kindly ask that you share, subscribe, rate, and review. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills! And I look forward to catching up with you again after the game.